Biodiversity is the range and number of organisms that are found in a single place. We're going to look at how many different types of species there are and how many individuals of each species. We can explore biodiversity at 3 different levels. We can look at species diversity, genetic diversity, and habitat diversity. All right, so species diversity is looking at the variety of different species. A rainforest is going to have a very high species diversity because they have a large number of species. The aquatic equivalent of that would be a coral reef. Something that would have a very low species diversity would be an urban area, polar ice caps, our industrial farms, which practice monoculture and have one species or one crop. Genetic diversity is a range of genetic material that's present in a species. So basically what we're looking at is its gene pool. Each individual in a species has a slightly different set of genes from any other individual. So if a species has different populations in different areas or different ecosystems, each population is going to have a different total genetic makeup. That's why it's important when we're conserving species that we look at all of its populations, not just in one ecosystem. Okay. Our third type of biodiversity is habitat diversity. And that's the variety of ecosystems that we have, like rainforests, deserts, tundras, grasslands. All right, so then that brings us to the question, well, what can lead to diversity loss? How are we losing diversity in each of these ecosystems? So we'll make a list of what those are. The first one are natural hazards or natural disasters. And that's things like volcanic eruptions, drought, if there are periods of ice age or global warming, meteor impacts, things that humans have no control over. All right, the second one we do have control over, that is habitat degradation. And that is when we are exploiting the resources, taking those away from other species. That can be fragmentation. If we build roads through an ecosystem, if we are cutting down trees, developing areas, we are causing loss of ecosystems, loss of habitat, and that can decrease diversity. Okay, the next one is habitat disturbance. And that also includes tropical deforestation, destruction of coral reefs, destruction of wetlands. That also can include freshwater and marine pollution. Remember, marine is saltwater. Agriculture, overgrazing, commercial development, all of that falls into this category. We mentioned the habitat fragmentation with the degradation. The reason that habitat fragmentation is so harmful is that it increases the edges of an ecosystem. So it makes those species more vulnerable to predators, competition, wind, fire, any other outside factors. Okay, another factor that can lead to diversity loss is agriculture. With agriculture, we clear the land and replace all of the species that existed, usually with one crop, with monoculture. So either we remove an ecosystem and we plant corn in its place. So all of those other species have been removed. When we spray pesticides, we are decreasing biodiversity because we're getting rid of species. When we use genetic modification, we are decreasing the genetic diversity because every individual in that crop has the exact same genetic makeup. Okay, another one that we can add to our list is predators and pest control. We used to have a Carolina parakeet in North Carolina, and the fruit farmers in the southeast would kill the parakeets. They would trap them, get rid of them because they were eating their crops. Another example is when African farmers kill the elephants that were trampling their food crops. All right, another thing we can add, hunting or collecting or harvesting. We'll just add hunting. The international trade in wild plants and animals generates about $10 to $20 billion each year. For example, gorillas each year generate about $150,000, chimpanzees $50,000, the Amazon macaw $30,000. And for every live animal that's sold as a pet in the U.S., about 50 other animals were killed. It's about how it averages out. Other examples, the sale of bushmeat to local people. Over harvesting, when commercial fishermen go out with the big nets, they aren't just catching their target fish, they're catching everything else as well. Pollution is another human-caused biggie that can lead to a decrease in biodiversity. So that's air pollution, water pollution. So things like oil spills, factories, all of that can contribute. And one that we've mentioned before that can lead to diversity loss is the introduction of non-native species. And these can be either accidentally or, that's spelling, accidentally introduced or introduced on purpose. And what happens, these non-native species are going to take the resources of the native species. About 49% of all of the animals on the endangered species list in the United States are caused by non-native species. We don't think of crops as being non-native, but corn, wheat, cattle, poultry, those things that supply about 98% of our food sources are considered non-native species because we've introduced them to areas where they weren't present before. A lot of times introduced species don't have natural predators, so there's nothing to control their numbers, and they take the resources of those species that were already present. So we looked at the video on the cane toads as one example. Another example of a non-native species that's present in the southeast is kudzu. Kudzu is a green vine. A lot of times you'll see it on the side of the roads in the summer that overtakes trees and bushes. It was introduced on purpose to control erosion, but what's happened is it's just kind of taken over because it has no natural predators. Zebra mussels are a type of shellfish that are present in the Great Lakes and have recently spread down to the Chesapeake Bay area. They were introduced from Eastern Europe, and they threaten a lot of the native populations in those areas. Gypsy moths are a non-native species in American forests. There's a rosy tree snail that was actually introduced in Hawaii to kill a giant African tree snail, and now there's a problem because its numbers have flourished. Feral and outdoor pet cats. They kill 568 million birds annually. Fire ants were accidentally introduced to Alabama, and they've since spread throughout much of the southern United States, and we're starting to see them in this area as well. And then the last example I'm going to mention, there's a brown tree snake that was accidentally introduced into Guam, and it's had a large effect on the local natural bird and lizard population. So in class, we looked at how to estimate the abundance of organisms, because before we can figure out the biodiversity, we need to know how many species and how many individuals of each we have. So we use the quadrant method for our stationary species like our plants or barnacles, and we looked at the Lincoln index for our mobile species, our animals. So I'm going to show you that formula one more time if you need to write that down.